Welcome to the summer edition of the Sprint to Success with Design Thinking podcast.
How do you navigate change? It's a question we think about often, and one that today's world expects us to be comfortable with. The challenge, however, is where do you begin, and how do you develop the mindset and skill set to be successful? Welcome, everyone, to the Sprint to Success with Design Thinking podcast. I'm your host, Saba Kidwai. Join me each week as I share the stories and strategies from the world's leading researchers and practitioners about why they believe the answer lies in practicing design thinking.
So my journey started back in 2012. My oldest son, Theo, at the time was 14 years old, and he was diagnosed with this incredibly rare blood cancer that required a bone marrow transplant for him to survive. And so that started this journey of 263 days living in the hospital with him battling. And we found ourselves at a crossroads during his treatment where they had two separate issues that were happening that were both threatening his life. And no matter which one the doctor decided to treat, the other they thought would certainly take his life. And so we found ourselves in the parents' lounge one evening with 4 or 5 doctors sitting in front of us. And they said, we're incredibly sorry, but there's nothing else we can do. And we don't think he's going to make it through the night. So you should probably go say your goodbyes and, call who you need to call. And so, when you're in a room full of experts, what do? You say, okay. And, I grabbed my wife's hand and we walked back to our son's room and grabbed his younger brother and, sat on the edge of his bed. And, you try to find words for that moment, which is incredibly difficult, as you can imagine. And, I ended up having to call my younger brother, who lives 1,500 miles away. He wasn't going to have time to make it before Theo passed. And so we said, if you're going to say goodbye, I'm sorry, but you have to do it over the phone. And so he did. And he was incredibly distraught, as you can imagine, and felt helpless. And so he decided that night, the only thing he could do was to sit on his couch, film himself holding these poster boards that basically described what was happening. My nephew is dying. We have less than 24 hours. Here's what's happening. Here's what we've tried. If you have any ideas, please help us. And he uploaded that video to YouTube. I stayed on the edge of the bed all night with Theo, sort of waiting. And the next morning, my phone is ringing off the hook, and I'm trying to ignore it. I'm awful at being present, and so I didn't want to be distracted. So I just sort of put my phone aside. And after a couple of hours, my phone was hot from vibrating all morning. And so I finally grabbed it and I looked at it, and I had all these messages and texts from numbers and people that I don't know. What I hadn't realized by the time I picked up that phone, I did not know my brother had made a video and uploaded it to YouTube. But by the time I looked at my phone, it had already been seen 500,000 times. And I was getting these messages from people from all over the world, some of them doctors. And so one of the doctors was at MD Anderson in Houston. And I had a voice message from him, and he said, hey, I saw this video, and I happen to be one of the leading researchers in this fungus that's attacking your son. Would you mind if I talk to your doctor? There's a new treatment that I don't know he's aware of. And so we put them in touch with each other, and I got a call from Dr. Tim Johnson from Good Morning America. And he said, I saw this video. If you get me a list of anyone your doctor wants to speak to, I'll try to make it happen in the next 24 hours. And so we made a list of a doctor at Dana-Farber in Boston, a clinical researcher at Cornell, and our doctor here from MD Anderson that had already gotten involved. And they came up with this crazy plan to try to save my son's life. And it worked. And so we went from say your goodbyes to a treatment plan that was effective enough that changed the course of his life forever. And I go back to that fairy tale ending that you can't live in a pediatric oncology ward for a year and not see the atrocities of childhood cancer. But, I go back to that. And even though we had this incredible situation happen where they saved Theo's life, I went to bed every night for 4 or 5 years with one question rattling around my head, which was, I wonder if he thinks I gave up on him. In that moment where I sat on the edge of the bed, I let somebody else dictate what my future was. And they don't have that kind of power unless I give that to them. And so I had to sort of come to terms with the fact that I hadn't defined my non-negotiables in that moment. So I relied on my emotions, and my emotions were in this tornado during that moment. And it was an awful decision for me to say goodbye to my son, when if I would have defined these things that I know now, these non-negotiable black sheep values that I have are creativity, hope, impact, empathy, family, and authenticity. If that would have been defined, that conversation with him would have been completely different. And in full transparency, as we record this, my son's on a ventilator in the hospital. And yesterday, he crashed and had to be brought back. And I was able to have a do-over with my son. And I was able to have a conversation filled with hope and impact and empathy and family and authenticity and all those things that were missing from the first conversation. And I refused to say goodbye because those doctors don't control the outcome of my son. And I realize that now. And so the deliberate intention that went into the conversation that happened yesterday, my heart hurts, but I have to tell you that I'm able to go home and feel good about the conversation that I had, as opposed to what happened, almost 9 years ago to the day.
It's your turn to join the conversation by sharing what you enjoyed or what questions you still have. In a world where time and attention are so valuable, thank you for choosing to listen and for being a part of our Sprint to Success with Design Thinking community.